So I think there's a really good chance that Howie Roseman could make a massive move on day one of the NFL draft next month. I'll tell you what that move could be coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase. Welcome into this Monday edition of the show. It is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code in all capital letters, Locked On NFL, at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. As we always do on Monday, we're going to do a 7-round Philadelphia Eagles mock draft for Mock Draft Monday. And going through each and every scenario, I try to make it different. Howie Roseman every single year does it different. Sometimes he's trading up the board. Sometimes he's trading down. Actually, the last few years, even though he doesn't have a history of this, he's been doing the stick and pick strategy a little bit more, where he just stays put at his pick in the 30s or the 20s and takes a Nolan Smith, takes a Quinyon Mitchell. So for Mock Draft Monday, we like to go through so many different scenarios because Howie Roseman is always moving up and down the draft board, and draft night is always, it feels like a surprise. I've said this on the show all the time. Howie Roseman is going to be predictably unpredictable in about a month. The draft is almost a month away, which is absolutely incredible. Time is flying. It's almost been 2 months since they won the Super Bowl. But when that day one does come around, I think there's a really good chance that a massive trade could be a part of the Eagles' day one. I really do think an aggressive move up the board is possible. Have you looked at the offseason and seen what Howie Roseman's done? It's been very quiet. It's been very conservative. It's been very thrift shoppy with who he's bringing in from a free agent perspective. He's letting a lot of guys from that Super Bowl team leave and get more money, bigger contracts with other teams. But I don't think that's going to be the theme of the entire offseason. Just because Howie Roseman didn't make a splash in free agency, and what I think, again, is a weaker free agent class, doesn't mean he's not going to be aggressive all year. I've been saying it on the show a few times. I think if there is a big move to be had, and I said this even before the start of free agency, I think it will come through the draft. Because when you look at the next few years, Howie Roseman has collected, as you know, once we see what happens specifically with comp picks, the projection is that Howie Roseman will have collected about 20 draft picks in these next two drafts. And if you look at what he did the last time he collected that kind of draft ammunition after the Carson Wentz trade, you saw some aggressive moves up the board for Devontae Smith, for Jalen Carter, trading a first-round pick for A.J. Brown. You saw him trade up for Cooper DeJean last year. You've seen him trade down. You've seen him trade picks for veterans. You've seen him do everything. He likes to have that optionality, which is given to you when you have a ton of draft picks. You can have your cake and you can eat it too. And when you look at this draft, I've been doing a few mock drafts like every single day just to kind of get a feel for how this board could fall, what positions could be there for the Eagles at 32 if they're not able to make a trade up, if they do stick and pick like they did last year, like they did in 2023 when they took Nolan Smith, if they trade down. Like I want to see what the options are with that pick. Is it worth staying there? Is it worth trading down? Every time I do one of these mock drafts on multiple simulators, it's not just one website, I've noticed there's a pretty big drop-off in this class. After that, I would say from like picks 22 to 25. Once it gets past the top 20, there's a really big drop-off, especially in the trenches where I think the Eagles are going to focus that first pick they make, whether it's in the first or second round, on the offensive line, especially on the defensive line, edge rushers, defensive tackle. Yes, it's a very deep class at those positions. Like there are good players likely that will be available for you at 32, that will be available at 64 in round 2. There's going to be some good players in round 3. It's a much deeper class. It's loaded this year compared to 2024. But at the same time, when you look at the rest of the draft, it's not very deep. It's not deep at wide receiver. I don't know if it's as deep on the offensive line as it is the defensive line from a tackle perspective. There's some really good players. Are there a bunch of elite tackle prospects? I'm not so sure. When you look at the quarterback position, there's not going to be 6 guys off the board in the first round like there was last year to help push a Quinyon Mitchell down the board. In other years, Quinyon Mitchell likely would have been, like in this year's draft, Quinyon Mitchell is probably a top 10, top 15 pick. There's not 6 quarterbacks that are going to push down all these trench players to the Eagles. Cornerback, it's an okay draft. Safety, it's got 2 really good players. But normally you don't see a run on those positions anyway, regardless of the talent in the first round. So even though the trenches are very deep, there's a big drop-off after that top 20 range. Like 22 to 25, sometimes the board has fallen where there's like nobody even available I'd pick at 32. So I could, even though it's a deep class, and Howie Roseman could elect to even trade down and continue to collect future assets, to be aggressive in the future, to have more picks and maybe better draft classes, I think he could also consider the option of trading up if a tier 1 guy does creep past the top 15. Like to make sure he gets his hands on one of those blue chip prospects, because there aren't a lot of those guys in this draft. It's a very meat and potatoes kind of draft class. I could see if a couple players I have in mind fall down the board that Howie could make a move. Because again, he has so much draft capital that he's not going to sell the farm in the form of a trade up. He can have his cake and he can eat it too. And the trade that I make here, Mock Draft Monday, that I'm about to unveil, it has an asset that is not in the form of a draft pick. The Eagles have a premier asset, and it's in the form of a star player on offense that they could actually use. If they're not going to make it work with this player, I think they could use this player as part of a trade-up, and it's why there hasn't been a resolution yet on his contract, and it's Dallas Goedert. So the trade that I made in Mock Draft Monday today for our 7-round mock, I called up the Indianapolis Colts. I saw a specific player fall down the board at a premier position that the Eagles could use some replacements there after departures and free agency into retirement. I called up the Colts at 14. I offered, and ChatGPT actually helped me build this trade through the Jimmy Johnson trade pick value chart. I offered the 32nd overall pick and the Eagles' 3rd round pick this year, which is 96th overall. I offered the 1st round selection, a 3rd round selection, a 4th next year, and Dallas Goedert for the 14th overall pick and a 6th rounder in 2026. So the Eagles are going to move up here 18 spots. The Colts reunite Dallas Goedert with Shane Steichen. They could use an elite target over the middle of the field to help Anthony Richardson develop as a quarterback as they're giving him one last chance. Dallas Goedert's still only 30 years old, coming off an elite playoff run. If the Eagles don't give Goedert an extension, I could totally see them trying to use him as a trade chip to get up the board on day one. So the Colts get the 32nd overall pick, a 3rd and a 4th, and Dallas Goedert. The Eagles get the 14th overall pick, a conditional 7th this year, and a 6th rounder next year. Who am I targeting with this selection? Tennessee edge rusher James Pierce Jr. Howie Roseman is going all in to replace Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham. Yes, he did sign Joshua Uche in free agency. He did sign Azeez Ojulari as well, a pair of 2nd-round picks that have some past production. Uche had 11.5 sacks in 2022. Azeez Ojulari had 6 sacks last year, which is solid. He had 8.5 as a rookie back in 2021. Had 5.5 a couple years ago. Like consistently a 5 to 8 sack guy a year. But those two players are not stopping you from making a move at edge rusher in the draft. Those guys are on 1-year prove-it deals, and the last few years they haven't met the potential of that 2nd-round selection that the Patriots at the time and the Giants placed on them. You have Jalen Hunt, you have Nolan Smith, but I think the Eagles do want a really good 3-man rotation. James Pierce Jr., I think it's the perfect replacement for Josh Sweat. Like, he is that prototypical athletic, powerful, lengthy traits kind of edge rusher that's going to put his hands in the dirt and go get the quarterback. But unlike Jalen Hunt and Nolan Smith, he's a little bit bigger. Like, I think he is more built like Josh Sweat. He has that more traditional 4-3 type of edge rusher build. But at the same time, he's also an athletic freak. Like, he can stand up as a rusher. He can drop back in coverage. I mean, at the combine, he destroyed the testing. He ran, like a sub 4.5? Unbelievable. Like, his vertical was ridiculous. The cone drills, like showing his agility on the field, was unbelievable. The production is there on the film as well. It backs it up. Like, this guy's explosive first step is unreal. His swim move, his speed to power type of pass rush moves, like, he has a bag. This is a guy that I think is a top 10 talent. But I could see him falling to that, 10 to 11 to 15, 11 to 18 range, because there are some concerns, and I've done my own work about this. I talked about it on the show last week. I'm less concerned about James Pierce off the field than others are, but there are some concerns about his maturity off the field that could allow him to drop not in a Jalen Carter type of way, because I think that was more serious, but it could in a class where there are some other good options at the top, like a Jalen Walker, a Mikal Williams, a Shamar Stewart, a Mike Green. It could allow James Pierce to fall down the board just enough where the Eagles could strike. And I think James Pierce would definitely be worth the assets they're giving up. The 32nd overall pick, a third rounder in Dallas Goedert for James Pierce. You put James Pierce with Jalix Hunt, Nolan Smith, boom, and you go forward. James Pierce, Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, Jalen Carter, Moro Ijoma. Look, Milton Williams and Josh Sweat were great last year, but I don't think you're going to miss them a whole lot if you're able to add these players. I think a massive trade-up could happen for the Eagles if the board falls right, like it has in years past. Sometimes it doesn't. In a lot of these simulations that I've run, it doesn't, but that's also part of why I wanted to be aggressive in this mock, and they have the draft ammunition to do it. They do, and I think they might be willing to give up some future picks if they can't get a team to take Goddard as well as part of this trade, as if they don't see him as an asset. I could see them be willing to give up a 2 or higher in future drafts for a player like this. And again, I'm not concerned about the off-the-field issues, but some could be, some are, and it might allow James Pierce Jr. to fall in range for the Eagles. We traded up for him for the 14th overall pick and selected him to pair with Jalix Hunt and Nolan Smith and replace Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham. We'll continue Mock Draft Monday coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Still got 6 picks to make, round 2 through 7, coming up next. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? I know I'm like this for dining out, online shopping, even entertainment. It's easy to lose track. I am a spender. Well, that's where Monarch Money comes in. They're your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth as well. When I started using Monarch, I realized how much I was spending specifically on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save a lot more. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever as well. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDON for half off your first year. And guys, today's show is also sponsored by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. March Madness is here. FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I got my eye on a few underdogs this week. FanDuel's making it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, we continue Mock Draft Monday right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. A big move on day one for the Eagles in this scenario. The trade of, I don't want to say the year for the Birds, but I mean, they haven't made this kind of trade up in a long time. Like, this would be the biggest move they've made in the first round since, well, I guess of course trading for A.J. Brown was massive, but when it comes to like trading up for a player, this would be it's the biggest since Carson Wentz. I mean, they traded up for, Jalen Carter. They traded up for Devontae Smith. They've had some polarizing picks, Jalen Reagor in 2020, but this move would be huge. I moved up from 32 overall to pick 14 with the Colts to take James Pierce Jr., the Tennessee edge rusher, trading away the 32nd overall pick, this year's third rounder, Dallas Goedert, and then a fourth rounder next year, getting back the 14th pick, a conditional 7th that could be a 6th in 2026. So I used ChatGPT to help me with the trade scenario, just to line up the draft charts, and it seems like it works if the Colts do see Goedert as a legitimate asset to have a reunion with Shane Steichen to help Anthony Richardson grow in a make-or-break year 3. if he's seen as like a second or third round evaluation, the total points on Jimmy Johnson's chart between the 32nd overall pick, Dallas Goedert, and the third, it does add up enough to make it justifiable. If Dallas Goedert's not a part of this trade, yeah, if you want to get James Pierce and move up into the top 15 from 32, it's going to cost you. It might cost you next year's first round pick. It might cost you a 2 and a 3. Who knows? But I could see Howie Roseman, who's been quiet in free agency, sitting on his hands a little bit. I could see him being more aggressive, though, to get an expensive star through the draft, like a James Pierce or somebody else that falls down the board. Maybe your cup of tea is more Jalen Walker or Shamar Stewart or Mikael Williams. Maybe it's a different position like Malachi Starks. Either way, I could see them being aggressive in a trade-up inside the top 20, at least past the top 25, because I keep seeing a drop-off every time these simulations run. And you never know how the draft's going to go, but I think they do want to get up from, if they don't get inside the top 25, I'm going to predict right now the Eagles do not pick at 32. They're going to trade down because the options at 32 compared to 42 to 45, 46, if you make a move in that range, it's not really that much different. So let's get into that range, though. Round 2. My second selection after taking James Pierce Jr. in round 1, I took a tight end because, of course, in this scenario, we traded away Dallas Goedert. Jalen Hurts needs that tight end over the middle of the field. That's an important relationship. Jalen Hurts has really trusted Dallas Goedert over the years on third down, especially in RPO plays, which is a big part of the Eagles' offense. Over the middle of the field where Jalen already doesn't throw enough in that area, if you take away Dallas Goedert, it's going to add to that avoidance even more. So I think you want to add that kind of security blanket to Hurts. I mean, yes, you have Dotson and Brown and Smith and Saquon. Not sure why I said Dotson first, but I digress. You have weapons still, but that kind of possession-like big-bodied tight end target over the middle, I think that's an important part of this offense to have. So I'm bringing in, and I've selected a couple different tight ends in Mock Draft Monday. I've taken Mason Taylor from LSU. I've taken Elijah Arroyo from Miami. I think I took Harold Fannin at one point. I'm going to take another guy here that I really like so we can talk about some more prospects. Texas tight end Gunnar Helm, which is such a tight end name, right? Gunnar Helm, what a great name to replace Dallas Goedert. And I like Gunnar Helm. He is a different kind of tight end than the Eagles are used to. He's not the, Zach Ertz was an elite route runner. Like, that was his thing. Dallas Goedert was an elite deep threat and run after the catch player. Gunnar Helm is more of that basketball style tight end, plays above the rim, a contested catch guy, very much so like a Jimmy Graham, like the old school Antonio Gates post up style, but he's a lot more smooth of an athlete compared to some of those Rob Gronkowski. But that's who he is. He's 6'5". He is so good with contested catches. He's a physical player, a good blocker, which is important because you're going to lose Dallas Goedert, who's an elite run blocker. Having Gunnar Helm, he's a better blocker than a guy like, in my opinion, Elijah Arroyo. So I think that might be a reason you might prefer somebody like Helm. Again, he's great at just you throw it up, he's going to go up and get it in the red zone. But he's a smooth route runner too. He does have really good hands. Yes, he's not the route runner of Zach Ertz. He is not the deep threat, the run after the catch weapon that is Dallas Goedert, but he does a little of everything really well. And his strength, his superhero power, his superpower, his strength is throw it up, he's going to go get it. And so Gunnar Helm, I think, is a good replacement for Dallas Goedert. And again, I think that's a really important role that you want to replace Dallas with if you do lose him, especially in this kind of scenario where we traded him on day one for an edge rusher. By the way, when I did trade up for James Pierce, Tyler Warren was on the board, tight end out of Penn State that I think is going to be a top 10 pick, but he is one of the best tight end prospects to come out in a very long time. I was tempted to take him, but I feel like if the Colts wanted Dallas Goedert, they probably would just take Tyler Warren there. But if I'm the Eagles, if it is between a Warren or a James Pierce, if they did trade up, I think, I don't want to say Tyler Warren would be a luxury, but he kind of would be. The Eagles don't need Tyler Warren. They could use another premier pass rusher like James Pierce. So Warren was on the board, but I thought this was the better idea. Trade up for somebody like James Pierce, an elite pass rusher, then in a deep tight end class in round 2, go get one of those other guys that after, Warren and Colston Loveland, go for one of those 3, the next 4, Mason Taylor, Harold Fannin, Elijah Arroyo, or Gunnar Helm. We haven't taken Gunnar Helm yet, so I like that pick. Round 4, pick 134 after we traded our third round pick. So this is our next selection. I took Cincinnati guard Luke Kandra. Luke Kandra is a guy that I think could be good competition for Tyler Steen and Kenyon Green. This will be a more true open competition for the right guard starting job. Unlike last year, after Tyler Steen went down, it was pretty obvious Mekhi Becton had that job locked up. Whereas this year, with Steen, with Green, with even Keegan as well heading into year 2, I think there's going to be more of an open competition. And I feel like Kandra can be a guy that they like, that they could develop into a starter. He moves really well in space. He gets up the field well in the run game. Didn't allow a single sack last year. Like, he is a really good pass blocker. I could see there being a real competition at right guard. So that's my third pick here. Round 4, pick 134, Luke Kandra from Cincinnati. And now we have a flurry of round 5 picks. We have 4 selections to make. I imagine the Eagles won't make all these picks if they have 4 on day 3. They also have a bunch of 5th rounders next year. They own the 5th round in the next 2 drafts. But if they do, here's what I would do. We've got a edge rusher now. We've taken care of tight end. We got another guard for that competition, adding some more offensive line depth. Now I'd like to add another defensive tackle, which we haven't really expressed, or I should say attacked right now in free agency or in the draft. So you lose Milton Williams. You want to add another young guy to that rotation. I like Oregon defensive tackle Jamari Caldwell. Fangio wants and needs more defensive tackle depth. He has said you want 6 or 7 guys available. They've got Jalen Carter. They got Jordan Davis, Moro Ojomo, Thomas Booker. They've got 4 guys they like a lot. But I think they want to have 5 or 6 that are dressed every single week. And so adding a rookie, I think, is very likely. Jamari Caldwell's a player that's a good run stopper. He's not lengthy. He's undersized. He's built like a bowling ball for a defensive tackle. Really low center of gravity, but he's powerful. And I think he has violent hands, a really good first step. He's explosive for a guy that looks like that. You would think this is just like your traditional run-stopping 2-down player, but even if he is, like, that's a good player to have rotating with Jordan Davis. He can be your younger version of a Linval Joseph. But he's a good pass rusher, too. Like, he has quick hands, quick feet, a really high motor. We took Oregon defensive tackle last time, a different one, and we're going to take another one this time in Jamari Caldwell. A couple more picks here to wrap up Mock Draft Monday. This is going to be this year's version of, like, the one year I kept taking Charles Omenihu, right? Or the one year we kept taking Alton Robinson from Syracuse. There's just every year there's one guy in Mock Draft Monday that we would always take. This year's player, San Jose State receiver Nick Nash, the Mock Draft Monday king. I just really like him. I think the Eagles, I've heard the Eagles, some people in that building are interested in Nick Nash. The Eagles need some wide receiver depth beyond, Smith, Brown, Dotson. What do they have? Covey's gone. It's really just Johnny Wilson. And I was a Johnny Wilson guy, but last year I have some concerns now about his hands. So they need to add some more competition for Wilson. Nick Nash is a technician. You can play in the slot. He's a smart player, a former quarterback, has good size, can go up and get it. Good competition at receiver, another physical, tall receiver to compete with Johnny Wilson. So I think Nick Nash will be a guy the Eagles do like, and I want more trick plays this year. Maybe add some more Lions-like concepts to the offense. Nick Nash can throw the football, so maybe he's a trick play specialist as well that you can bring in for cheap in round 5. 2 more picks here in round 5, the 165th overall pick, bringing in some more offensive line depth. Jack Nelson. You did lose Fred Johnson, who was your swing tackle last year. You lost Mekhi Becton, who was another guy that could play both guard and tackle. I think Jack Nelson can be a good replacement option. He does play tackle more traditionally, but he also has played guard in his career. I think Jack Nelson, you add more depth. You want another swing player that can play inside and out. Tyler Steen could potentially be that option if he doesn't win the starting right guard job. But you want to add some tackle depth now that Fred Johnson's gone. They also do like Darian Kennard a lot, I've heard. But, depth, adding more players for Jeff Stoutland to develop is not a bad idea. And then our final pick here for Mock Draft Monday, round 5, pick 168, adding a safety. Clemson safety R.J. Mickens. Howie adds more safety competition without Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to add to the room with Reed Blankenship and Sidney Brown, Tristan McCullum. I'd imagine in this scenario, they're going to sign a veteran. Maybe it's Julian Blackmon. Maybe it's Justin Simmons. I would predict in this scenario it's Justin Simmons, who they bring in after the draft. But at the same time, adding another young guy for special teams can't hurt. RJ Mickens is a physical player, a lengthy safety, a good matchup for tight ends in man coverage. I don't really like him covering slot receivers. He's kind of stiff. He can get a little handsy in coverage, but he is very violent coming downhill against the run. He's a good tackler. I like adding another young safety before this draft is over. So there we go. Those are my selections for Mock Draft Monday. Round 1, pick 14, James Pierce Jr. Round 2, pick 64, Gunnar Helm. Round 4, pick 134, Luke Kandra. Round 5, here's the flurry of picks. Jamari Caldwell, Nick Nash, Jack Nelson, and RJ Mickens. Let me know what you think of my mock draft today. Hit us up at DiBiaseLOE on X or our YouTube community page on YouTube at Locked On Birds. So if the Eagles don't make a trade up the board like I just did and this one was aggressive. I moved up from 32 to 14, trading future picks, trading Dallas Goedert away. Like this would be like the story of the draft if the Eagles were able to do this. Let's say, though, they just stick and pick at 32. Right now, a month before the draft, gun to your head, who do you think that pick would be? I have an idea coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, so we all know Howie Roseman. He's a trader. I mean, I don't mean like he betrayed us. He likes to make trades. Trader Howie. Like that is his nickname for a reason. This guy started the trade era back in 2016. He literally set a record in last year's draft for the most trades in the 3 days of the NFL draft of all time. Like last year's draft, no GM in that 3-day span of one draft class has ever made more during the draft trades than Howie Roseman did last year. Like that's who we're talking about with the Eagles. Like he has to be involved. He gets FOMO. He gets fear of missing out when he sees other teams making trades. He likes to be the talk of the town. He likes to work the phones, and that's how he is able to do things like land A.J. Brown when nobody else thinks he's available, because nobody else would think to ask the Tennessee Titans if A.J. Brown is available. Howie Roseman does. And so normally, when the Eagles have a selection in round 1, they're not making that pick by the end of the night. They're either trading up, they're trading down. The vast majority of draft classes in my lifetime watching Howie Roseman run this team, they normally don't just stick and pick. They don't stay at their slated pick from the standings. They've done it a few times, but normally they're moving up and down the board. But I will say Howie Roseman the last few years has learned that sometimes sticking and picking isn't a bad thing. Like, don't always just make a trade for the sake of making a trade. If there's a player that falls down the board, it falls right into your lap, and you really like him, and he is some spots ahead of the next best player in your board based on, positions of need, positions of value. Sometimes sticking and picking is the right move. It was the right move last year to just sit there and let Quinyon Mitchell fall into his lap. And Howie's very good at understanding. Another strength of Howie, he's very good at his knowledge of the NFL, what's going on with other teams. He is very in the know. So Howie knew last year he didn't have to trade up to go get Quinyon Mitchell. He knew he was going to fall. He's good at predicting those kind of outcomes. And so sitting there and taking Quinyon Mitchell was the right move. The year before, I thought there's no way he's making that second pick after trading up for Jalen Carter. Nolan Smith out of nowhere falls into that range for him at pick 30, and he just takes Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith and Quinyon Mitchell now are two of your top 5 staples of this defense. So sometimes just, you don't want to make a reach. At 32 this year, I think odds are you should trade down if you're not going to move up, because the player at 32 isn't going to be much better than the player that you could get at 45 to 50. So normally you do trade down in that kind of scenario, but I think there are times where the draft falls in a way, the board falls in a way nobody predicted, and you just got to sit there and make the pick instead of just making a trade for the sake of making a trade. If there was a guy this year the Eagles do draft with the 32nd overall pick, who would that guy be? It's a month before the draft. gun to my head right now, if they don't move off that spot, odds are somebody fell, but let's say nobody really plummeted and they make a pick there. Like the other thing is it takes two to tango. What if nobody else wants to make a trade? Because if the Eagles don't see any of these guys as worth that pick, maybe the rest of the league doesn't. And there's not a quarterback, I think, that people want to come back in for to get that fifth-year option. So if the Eagles are stuck with that pick, I'm going to say Boston College edge rusher Donovan Ezereku is the selection. I think Ezereku is somebody the Eagles are really going to like. 16.5 sacks last year, but it's not just about the production because the Eagles have moved on from their production philosophy of when they were drafting Derek Barnett. They are much more honed in on potential, athleticism, like physical gifts, developing players. Look, they're more about the ceiling now than they used to be. They were more about the floor in the past. But it's not just that Ezereku has 16.5 sacks. It's the way he got them. Like, it is a ceiling. There is a ceiling there. The way he got those 16.5 sacks, like, he plays with a ton of violence. He has power. He has a high motor. He's undersized, but he plays big. He's very explosive off the line of scrimmage. Like, there is, again, the violence, the intensity that he plays with. I think he would fit right in with Jalen Carter, with Nolan Smith, with Jalix Hunt. And you might say, yeah, he's undersized. Are we going to have just that's what we're doing at edge rusher with Nolan Smith, with Jalix Hunt, with Donovan Ezereku, like all these guys? We're going to just have an under center edge group. The thing is he's good against the run, and he is powerful. If he can put on a little bit of weight and develop against the run, yeah, he's not going to be the James Pierce, like 4-3, or Josh Sweat, hand in the dirt type of guy. Josh Sweat was very underrated for what he did for the Eagles' run defense last year, but I think he can be a very good run defender. I think the Eagles are going to like him. They're going to like the production. They're going to like the skill set. They're going to think that he is the perfect kind of guy to be in a rotation with Hunt and Smith, who are already athletic freaks, so you already have the upside on the edge. Maybe they do like the floor player here, and he does still have a ceiling. Like, I think Ezereku is not Derek Barnett just because he had 16.5 sacks. So, gun to my head right now, based on the realistic outcomes, who would be available with that pick, I think Donovan Ezereku would be the selection at 32. It could change. If they stay there, odds are more likely that somebody else fell down the board that we didn't expect to be there. But Ezereku could also be seen as somebody that fell. I've seen a lot of mock drafts where he's taken from that 20 to 30 range. So Ezereku might be good value at 32. He's, right now, when I was thinking about this topic, my first hunch was him. I think he would be the pick if they stick and pick. Let me know again what you think. Hit us up on X at LockedOnBirds, at DiBiase, LOE, or hit us up on our comment section or our YouTube community page as well. Thanks as always for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. Get to know all these prospects with Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.